who are listening on the phone and that weren't able to make it today also have access to this on the YouTube. So I just started that recording. Beautiful. So just to frame kind of where we left off the last session, we talked quite a bit about kind of making sure that our mapping is really, really discrete. And so when we're looking at things like telecom, when we're looking at things like addressing, asking for a lot more distinct, okay, we're looking for, the telecom, I think it was maybe value, drilling down at that level while still kind of acknowledging that there are certain things like system that can help us differentiate between how a primary or an alternate or a home address versus an alternate address is used. And then we also talked quite a bit about asking from a framework perspective where there have been places where we talked about telecom a couple sessions where you could interpret primary a couple different ways for more guidance and separation of what those types of concepts and attributes mean. We got to, I think, about here, because we looked at telecom and we looked at home address last session. And I wanted to make sure we had a chance to kind of look at some of the modeling that's been done on emergency contact relationship as well, because there's a little bit of nuance here that I think it'd be helpful to kind of check in with the community on. So on the left-hand side, I've got kind of, this is the attribute name that comes from, or the element name that comes from the draft content standard. And then here's the element definition. And so if I am scrolled up to the top and I'm looking at kind of emergency relationships, that's going to be anchored around this kind of contact, right? This would be like a contact party with certain details that are anchored around ways of conveying that a contact is fulfilling an emergency role. And so there's really two pieces that I want to call out here. I'm going to scroll down to this attribute and I'll zoom in. And it's that effectively there's an emergency contact relationship, which is defined as context relationship to the person. So this would be like, are they a friend, a mother, a father, some degree of specificity, as well as the relationship type. So are they a next of kin in addition to being a mother? Are they an emergency contact or caregiver in addition to being a friend? And one of the funny things about FHIR is that, we have essentially some cases in FHIR where there are recommended or required or value sets that this FHIR standard puts forward for things like, in our case, emergency contact relationship. And it doesn't necessarily have the same degree of separation that we've been looking for here. So I'm going to scroll up to so you can actually see the value set. But one of the things that we had thought, okay, a way of approaching this might look like is to provide a coding from the FHIR value set that is like, is this an emergency contact? Is this a next of kin? Which would come from, I believe it's relationship. I wish it would show me the binding. Here it is. It's an extensible binding to patient contact. So that means that the goal is that we're recommending as a base FHIR specification that implementers use values from this value set unless a value that they need to be able to convey is not captured under the context of this. This is kind of challenging sometimes when a brother could potentially be a next of kin, right? Like may or may not be. A friend could be associated with, other, it could be associated with emergency contact. And so we're kind of working under the boundaries of, there's a value set that FHIR says, try to pick something from this to begin with, and a desire to express an attribute that goes to more specificity and potentially could be understood in combination with these. And so the kind of modeling that was put forward for those two attributes was, convey the first kind of coding, because we can supply multiple codings and multiple codable concepts as one from the extensible FHIR list. So do use that to map to this first one here, or sorry, it would be the second one. So that would be emergency contact relationship type. And if you further need to specify that your emergency contact or your next of kin was your mother or your father, to supply that as an additional coding. So you would supply 2 codings in the expectation that you're communicating, this person is my emergency contact and this is their relationship to me beyond that. I'm going to pause there and I'm going to like ask for kind of reactions about how people feel about that kind of over other options, like potentially we looked at related person, which is a resource that kind of allows for you to further convey details on a relationship, but it tends to be like broader context than just for the use of emergency contact information on the patient resource. Immediate thoughts, like, do people love this? Do people hate this? Do people think?
So I think it's a gray zone in the definition of codable concept. Because the various codings in codable concept are supposed to be different codes for the same concept. And so this is not quite that, but maybe close enough, right? So it feels like a gray area to me. I don't know what others think. Yeah, the related person is usually, I think, where we put things like, this is your person who's your POA, this is your guardian, this is your mother who's your caregiver in your team, right? So
my only concern with related person is that the relationship is in the other direction.
Well, yes, and there's a whole bunch of challenges on that too. But I think we need to be careful about muddying, like being clear about what concept is which.
Is it possible that we might do like a role and then do an extension for the familial relationship?
Yeah. I've forgotten, what's the cardinality in the base spec? I know there's no cardinality for the data framework on emergency contact. It's 0 to star.
Yeah.
Right. So you could provide multiples, which in my mind would be better than providing multiple codings in the same codable concept of subtly different concepts.
Agree.
I know this is a question that's being talked about in our value set working group. The difference between like the relationship, the familial relationship, and the role of the relationship. So I know that is a question. So any feedback that we get from here would be very useful.
What are our thoughts? So Lorraine, Elliot, I heard you kind of feeling it makes sense, even if there is maybe a little bit of gray zone, to have that separation. And so like putting forward more discrete guidance to supply these as separate codable concepts and have kind of multiple instances of them. Is that like, how are others feeling about that? Is that kind of preferable? Is preferable to an extension, or preferable to having to like determine sometimes it's a coding because it's kind of describing one and the same thing, like next of kin and a relationship, or having like a consistent pattern that we follow every time, which is regardless.
Could you move your cursor briefly so I can sort of peer at the relationship? So the relationship within the emergency contact is also 0 to star. So we can have multiple emergency contacts who may have multiple, and a given emergency contact may have multiple relationships.
So I'm not sure I like having emergency as a slice, because emergency is one of the values.
Well, emergency is a backbone element here for content. For one of the.
It's a slice. You can tell by the icon.
Yeah.
This is simplifier.
Yes, I'm less familiar with simplifier, so.
It looks like a slice of pizza.
Yes, well, like I say, I'm waiting for my new glasses and it's small. Yeah, I think that, the only thing I'm worried about is not sort of stretching the definition of codable concept by putting multiple but related codings in a codable concept when they don't actually express the same concept, because that starts to get outside of the definition.
And I'd be
What-
more inclined to call that slice role rather than emergency.
So let's separate it. So Elliot, are you comfortable capturing the first piece, which is like, given the choice between the two, recommending the use of multiple codable concept instances over multiple codings? And then we can talk about the second piece, Joni.
Yeah,
I think I left it more up to interpretation here, but I think knowing and having like a discrete call out that, yes, like we don't want to go down this path. We want it to be strictly conveyed as distinct codable concepts, I think is still helpful.
What about another attribute called type of the contact?
So let's take a look. So let me look at the snapshot.
it's not in there.
This is the hybrid view, yeah.
I know it's not there, but why not create an extension or propose something as opposed to mixing the two concepts, right? The relationship and the type.
Well, in my mind, I think either next of kin or brother would fit under the kind of relationship, like the definition of the element. But let's hear from what the impact is from like an implementer's perspective. So does it make sense if you've got maybe in your system one field that's supposed to capture this is next of kin or emergency contact, and one field that is, you know, brother, to have that separation tied as separate elements rather than to the same element but as different instances? Is there a preference? Because I think, Finney, that's kind of, you're saying that there might be some value to having that separation from like a systems perspective, right?
And at the same time, we don't want to really mix the concepts. Your value set. A brother is different from a next of kin, right? Well, you know, at a different level.
Yeah, and we're on slices of contact. So we're actually talking about lists of contacts. And so, you know, to Joni's point, we do also have lists of related persons. It's not structured the same way in terms of the resources. You have related persons that point to the patient. But we don't want to start doing two different approaches to the same thing. So we want to be careful about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure if the CA core is going to be implementing like a related person profile. So then if it's only on the related person relating, like, I don't like the related person because the reference is backwards. It's how is the related person related to the patient rather than on the patient saying this is the related person.
But that's actually how almost all of the FHIR references work, Joni.
Yeah.
They work, they're to people who do data models originally, traditional data models, they all feel backwards. Practitioner role to practitioner. It's a fact of life for
Yeah.
FHIR. And I think we're going to have to, we may not profile related person, but we're going to end up having to use it.
That is slightly, I mean, this goes back to the age of patient and the age of related person. But it is slightly interesting that patient doesn't point at related person for this information.
Yeah.
But that is the design we've ended up with.
Like for this, I'd be more inclined to have it as the contact role rather than straight up emergency. And then the relationship have the definition of like the type of role.
So is that in line then, Joni, when you say contact role, because it is an element to date, is that in line with what Finney's kind of suggesting, which is to have one be an extension and one fall under
Yeah.
relationship?
That's if you don't want to, like, I'd be all for having them both because you can just have a list. But if we want to separate the concepts, I would do the role as the relationship, because that's what that one is actually linking to the role. And then have a familial relationship extension.
We've got some implementers on the call. What do we feel like? Is the separation actually make it easier for you when you're either configuring your systems or receiving this information from elsewhere? Separation in the name of having one be an extension and the other conveyed under relationship.
Yeah, I've used it only for emergency contacts, and we only use relationships. And yeah, we would use related person if we wanted to link two patient files together instead of using that contact. So I'm not sure I would use anything else than relationship here.
So what if the other person doesn't already have like a patient, like you said, linking two patients together?
Yeah, then it would be to a person.
Or I just wanted to understand a little bit. Are we talking about the link there at the bottom? Is that what we're referring to for the related person?
The link on this
The
guide.
very last element of the profile is link.
No,
I think it's relationship or
That's not what we're talking about, right? Or is it?
correct. No, we're
Okay,
not talking about that.
So actually, if I was a better facilitator, I would have pulled this up already. I'll show you guys. This is related person, which is a separate resource. And when Joni was saying, like, rather than patient pointing to related person points to patient. So that would be here. So the idea is the information about this person's contact. So when you were filling out an intake form and you were entering in, this is so-and-so's emergency contact, here's their telephone number, that would be mapped against those fields in your database would be mapped against creating an additional resource, related person, that would point to that patient record here versus trying to convey it on the patient itself, which is, I think, what I had here.
Yeah, if you expand the link at the very bottom, it does have a link to related person.
Yeah.
But it's
If I
contact.
But
can,
you need to have a related person resource to link it to.
yeah, if I
Except
can
that
just
the
jump in
type-
for a second.
Except that the type do not make sense.
Yeah, so if I can just sort of quickly jump in. Patient contact is around the idea of who do we need to call for various reasons, or who should we let in to visit the patient? You know, oh, their brother, yes, okay, they can go in. So that's what that is. Patient link is, hey, we know there exists another record describing this same person linked to it. And that could either be, this is, you know, another patient that we've realized is a duplicate and it's been canceled, or this is them in a role as the related person to somebody else, to another patient, something like that.
Well, related person, the description of the profile.
Hold on, let me
Sorry.
finish. Then the related person resource is generally used when we're talking about a patient and you're getting their history and they're talking about their grandmother. And my grandmother had diabetes at an early age, whatever, right? That's what the related person is for, is when they are going to be the subject of clinical observations, maybe tests, whatever, in relation to the patient we're talking about. So the related person is used more for clinical purposes, whereas patient contact is used more for administrative reasons. Does that clarify things? Lorraine, do you agree with my Jake?
You might be on mute, Lorraine.
I was actually trying to
And
get
after
to the
Lorraine,
point where
Thomas has his hand up.
I was just trying to get to the point where I could reach the mute button. Yeah, I agree with Elliot's analysis. So there's a couple places where there's gray areas, and those particularly come around guardian, which is currently in the value set for related person, and things like power of attorney and stuff. But in general, I agree with what Elliot just said. I usually agree with Elliot.
Thank
He's a
you.
convincing guy. Thomas, did you have a question on this front or a comment on this front?
Two things. First, I do agree with Elliot. Here's a comment here. This is for administrative purpose. Second, I would say for what's the purpose for this emergency? Just want to share my opinion here. Very, go to the use case per se, imagination, maybe just myself. If you go to the emergency room and you see somebody suddenly falling down and you want to find an emergency contact there, you don't really care about what's the relationship. You just go to the record, click the emergency, expect that the phone number pop up. That's my case comes out. For the emergency, this can be put inside the end of contact, but need to be ordered. And who will decide it? I would say it might be the patient as a subject to owner, or how does the custodian for this piece of information, he or she will decide the order of it in that emergency, that component, and then decide who will be who will be called at the very beginning as secondary and the tertiary. That's my comment here. Thank you.
So what I've heard is that we all feel pretty good about keeping this concept that we've been talking about somewhere in this view rather than related patient. And I haven't heard it differently. Please stop me if you feel differently. But I still haven't heard a consensus of it is probably from a baseline perspective, a recommendation one way or the other about whether or not we would say this is something we'd be more likely to recommend as a distinct codable concepts that are expressed on the same element versus the extension option where like a role or a type is used to convey the the friend, mother, father scenario. Is there anyone that feels very strongly for their case of modeling over the other one that wants to make that case? And
Eric has his hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't clapping. I was trying to raise my hand, but just wondering the mother's and the parents' name would be in the other slices. Would it be in the contact information if I want to capture the mother's name and the father's name?
yeah, the way it's modeled is that emergency is right now effectively being used as a slice to say, if you want to convey an emergency relationship, there's an expectation that you support the relationship information as well as the name. So text, family given, and telecom. So part of what we're not seeing here is like the reason for using slicing to describe this is because there's these additional expectations around emergency contact information and the content that falls below it. So yes, you would expect a relationship paired with a name, paired with a telecom.
Yeah, correct. Or maybe not a telecom for the mother or father.
Yeah, if it
You
wasn't
could
available.
Yeah.
So there's actually two value sets in FHIR that talk about relationships. One is the patient contact relationship, which is the binding that the relationship under emergency has, and that just has the roles. And then the other one that's used on related person is the one that has all of the familial relationships, but it also has all the roles.
So I'll put those both, or actually I might have you put them in the chat because otherwise I have to exit out of my view. So that would be like a combination of some of the things that we saw, like you said, as well as further specificity on roles, aunt, cousin, paternal aunt. I know what you're angling at, Joni, which is, could we use a different value set? Could we change what is in FHIR here under relationship to swap out the value set, given its
Well,
accessory.
actually, what I was angling at is have this one be the role and use the value set as it is there, and then have an extension for the relationship type that has all the familial relationships and friends and neighbors or whatever.
That would use this.
Yeah.
Is that something that you would kind of say, make an argument or a motion to say, I think this is what the baseline should be pushing for in terms of feedback?
I'm not going to make a motion. I'm just putting it out there.
Sorry, Johnny, just want to understand. So right now, in the patient, the relationship is pointing to the next of kin and all of those, right? Not the father, not the brother, right? So if we're-
Yes, emergency, next of kin, all of those
Yeah.
ones, like
So
emergency.
just trying to
employee-
understand your recommendation, right, what you're getting into. Are you suggesting that we flip the binding?
No,
create
I'm
another-
suggesting that we leave the binding as is.
Okay, yeah,
And,
yeah.
and we have an extension that uses the other binding so that you can have a contact that has a relationship role and a relationship type.
Okay, yeah, yeah, I'm supporting that. So an extension that binds to the type of, not type, but whether they're father, mother, sister, or whatever, right? The familiar relationship.
Yeah,
Okay, okay.
and
good.
but again, I wouldn't want that slice to say emergency because then that leads you to believe that it's only for emergency contact.
Correct. Well, except that it seems that the requirement for the mapping right now is they're only interested in emergency contact.
Yeah, I think that might be changing.
Okay, because emergency contact, and then
Yeah,
the
it would
description
be,
it also says emergency contact, so it's kind of redundant, right?
yeah, like
There is a
emergency
type of-
contact would be a contact with relationship of emergency.
Sorry, just chip in here. Actually, it's just want to try to add in my comment here. My understanding, emergency, there's no really any connection with the relationship. In my understanding here, emergency, I can put anyone as my emergency contact. It doesn't be constrained by any relationship here, but actually does provide extra information there. And emergency here might really focus on the ranking of the emergency, because in that really emergent situation, the contact information that if the first phone call is very crucial in that matter, decision need to be made. So the next practitioner or whatever can proceed their next intervention. In that matter, I think the ranking in the emergency, if we still talk about in that context, emergency as the term definition shows, we need to think about a ranking in that emergency. Thank you.
And I don't think fire has that capability. They have the capability to rank a specific context.
I think you can apply a preferred on contact. I think, contact point. But that's really it. It's like, it's preferred and it's a Boolean value. Yes, no,
Yeah,
which isn't really, I think, quite the same sophistication.
Yeah, I think what Thomas is talking about is like when my mother ended up in emergency and they tried to call me, they couldn't reach me, they called my sister. Those kinds of things.
Wow.
yeah, like if somebody has more than one person listed as an emergency contact, like I might have my husband and my sister.
Yeah.
And how do you determine which one to go first? I don't think that is encompassed in this.
Mm-hmm.
If we wanted something like that, it's something that would need to be added as an extension.
Well, and to that point, actually, I'll make the call out, like, Thomas, if that's something that you think is valuable, like ranking, that it's probably something that should be requested and put forward as feedback that would go towards the framework to say, hey, we don't have an attribute for this today, but we're providing this, request or this feedback that I think it could be helpful to have as a separate attribute.
Well, my understanding, what's the purpose of this emergency? Who will be the actor or user of this emergency? Normally, it might not patient themselves, because they know all those information. They don't want to go to their patient profile to say, okay, this is my emergency list, and I will call it in the chain. It's the somebody else who really take care of the patient when the patient himself cannot really consciously and play as an independent a person in that manner. They will call the emergency in that manner. They really don't care about who will be called. They don't matter to know who the first person should be called at the phone number and who will be the secondary and tertiary, next one. That's the chain is very clear for that caller to ensure, and they clearly document in this patient profile.
So Thomas, for clarity, are you asking for, are you explicitly asking that we have some concept for ranking expressed?
Yes, that's what I want. The ranking is crucial here because when you call a phone number, it counted in seconds, and I compare with the emergency. That's
So-
it. You really match it.
So can I treat that like that's a proposition? Is there anyone that would second that? That's something that we want to put forward as a community feedback item for the framework?
I think Elliot's seconding it in the comments. He said
You
he
are?
thinks
Okay.
standard fire core extension for ranking makes sense. It would have value beyond CA core.
So then I'm gonna do
Yeah.
what we talked about a little bit before, because I think this one might be an easier one to like compartmentalize. So I hear a motion, I hear a second. Is there anyone that would not feel comfortable kind of weighing in on this that would say, yep, I want to abstain? Is there anyone that would feel like I would vote like negative? I'm not comfortable with the idea of asking the framework to consider introduction of rank as like as a clear attribute for separation here.
And just noting that it's different from the telecom rank, which is within a particular contact. Which contact method do you want to use first? It would be at a higher level than that.
Yep.
It'd be within the list of contacts, which contact do I want to call first?
So would anyone feel negatively about putting that forward as a request or a point of feedback? All right, Joni, I think you've got the count of participants.
19. So
Cool.
if you're not counting yourself,
18.
that would be 18.
Elliot, I'm sure it's just catching up, but are you comfortable capturing that in terms of the feedback item? Perfect. Okay. So
Do we want to
compartment-
count on it?
What's that?
We want to count on it? You want to move seconded?
We didn't originally identify that in our process, but I've been using it on ones where we feel like trying to determine if there's more discussion. Like, is anyone feeling like we should be?
So do we want to do a
counts?
formal show of hands if you want to abstain?
My
Or-
only, like my feeling is like if folks feel like, hey, this is gonna help us, we don't have it for the past comments. We can do it for the ones moving forward, or we can do it, if there's particularly contentious ones. I'm using it more as facilitation because it's kind of hard to get feedback from as a community and make sure that we're getting consensus on it, but we can capture it just as a nice to have.
I think if we're gonna use motions and votes, which I actually support, we need to do it consistently, not just on the ones we think are contentious, etc. So that's whatever our process is, we need to be consistent about it. And I'm very comfortable with using votes on this, but if our process is we just come to a general consensus and document it, which is what we're doing on the baseline JIRA tickets, if that's our documented process, that's what it is, right?
So we haven't been doing it on our comments to date. I think as long as folks are comfortable with the fact that we don't have that information for those. I mean, I can go back and see from the recordings, but we can capture those. It is helpful in like closing out a specific topic to say, yeah, is this what we're moving forward with as a feedback item?
Yeah, for instance, I went back to look at what we decided on the data absent reason thing on practitioner. And it was sort of clear in in what we wrote that the consensus was we would fix the invariant, but it wasn't crystal clear that that's what we had actually decided.
So Elliot, if you're comfortable, we can capture these from there here or not, and I'm gonna return to the item that we've had some discussion on to see if we can also kind of capture a position on that as well. So we heard about rank. We all felt pretty like there was not a lot of contention there. I heard two folks that were interested in saying rather than a codable concept, we want to do this as an extension. Joni, you didn't feel super confident in like putting that forward as like a motion and being like, yep, that's my idea. Is there anyone that like
More so because I'm doing work on this on the other side and I don't want to influence.
Yeah. So is there anyone that feels that we need more discussion to make a determination on whether or not we'd be requesting things like a separate extension on contact to convey the, I think you called it type, Joni, or role?
Yeah, like role versus like familial relationship, and Rita has her hand up.
Go ahead, Rita.
Yeah, so my concern here is that the link on relationship for contact relationship now is an extensible relationship. So once we've used emergency contact, then that's going to be your emergency contact. So are we suggesting that we have multiple emergency contacts and putting ranking on them, or are we suggesting that you're going to have another contact, but the relationship can only then be next of kin if it's mother, father, sister, brother? Because in an extensible value set, you cannot define more accurate specifications of a concept that's already there. So if you've already got relative or next of kin, then you cannot say mother, father, sister, brother, because those mean the same thing as next of kin. So if your relationship is brother and there is already a concept there that says next of kin, then that's what you are. You're next of kin. You can't add. It's my understanding that you cannot in an extensible binding add brother once you've got next of kin there in the value set.
Well,
so we
so
would have to do, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, your principles about extensible bindings are correct. So if you've got a concept that you want to use that's not in the value set, but there's a parent concept there that is, then you're supposed to use the parent concept. Next of kin and brother are actually not related in this particular case. They're not necessarily related because brothers aren't always next of kin. For instance, your mother might be your next of kin, or your spouse might be your next of kin. They're separate concepts, but you're right about how extensible bindings are defined. And when we're talking about,
isn't next of kin a family relative? Any family relative?
No, it's the one who's the closest one who's empowered to make decisions.
Okay.
So
you
if
might
you're
have
married,
you might have
Okay.
five family members, but only one is next of kin. They're the first person to contact.
Okay,
yeah.
got it.
So your spouse is likely your next of kin if you're married. For instance.
So
Next of kin is more of a role, kind of a role concept.
Now, there's lots of family relationships that become important, but they're separate concepts from next of kin. So I agree with your analysis of the extensible binding piece. I just disagreed with your example.
Rita, based on where you sit now, does that make you feel more or less comfortable with the idea of conveying sister, mother, brother as an extension?
Right, so just to reiterate, since next of kin is there in the value set, what we're saying here is that you can still add to your extensible value set brother, sister to that value set. Because
They're
that
separate.
wouldn't violate the extensible rule for that value set. Is that right? We're saying that we can add those values to the value set?
Yeah, because they're not necessarily descendant concepts of the concept next to.
Right.
So Rita, are you saying to make a new extensible value set, or just to be comfortable with the fact that as implementers, we will send additional codable concepts that may not be in this value set?
Yeah, I was just gonna send the additional values, but that aren't in the extensible value set, but then how do you convey both emergency contact and brother in the same?
Looking
And
at
that's why
this,
we were suggesting
anything on the
an
list,
extension.
anything on
extension?
the list, because the whole section is called, like the whole element is called emergency. Anybody on that list is an emergency contact. What we don't have is which one do you call first? The concept of next of kin really just means that's who you contact, but your emergency contact may not be next of kin because maybe all your family lives the other side of the country, so your emergency contact is your best friend. So
Right, so it's only an emergency contact if you set the relationship to be emergency contact.
Right,
but this whole node is the emergency.
right, but
Yeah.
the values that are in the relationship aren't, there's emergency is one of the values. That's why I don't like the idea of having it called emergency, unless you're going to specify that it has to be the code for emergency, then you're gonna need slices for each type of role, which becomes unwieldy.
Yeah, and
I think-
actually,
I agree.
I think emergency confers that this is the first person you call.
Well, you can have emergency 0 to star, so you can have multiples. But this is a slice on contact, where relationship type is value is emergency. That's what we're talking about specifically here, right?
So
Without the
Sheridan, we have a couple more
actual
hands up.
additional yeah, so what you'll notice is that this doesn't actually have a fixed code, like from an intentional perspective, but the goal is to convey, if you were using like the emergency relationship type here, you're also conveying these additional information, but we haven't layered in any fixed codes into the profiles to date. Joni, did you see the first person who put their hand up?
So the first person is
Rita,
Rita.
Fariba, and then myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Rita?
Now it's Fariba.
Yeah, no,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I think this discussion, I think this next of kin, it's actually causing some trouble. So because it will be their reputation. If we are having the next of kin as a brother, we'll have in one value set next of kin and the brother. So it's the repeating. And I actually end up again with the suggestion was in the beginning. I don't know if it was Lorraine or I'm sorry, I didn't get that. But I think it needs to have 2 levels. We should have a category, which is the higher level, which says next of kin, attorney, or whatever higher level. And then we should have the type, which is like brother, sister, mother, cousin, or whoever. So I think that works better. Otherwise, if we want to go with the same format in the profile, like emergency and relationship, then we should have like a combination of both of this in one value set. Because otherwise we cannot separate them. I mean, we cannot have next of kin and brother in one, as that could be also, you know, the brother and the next of kin, or even attorney. So I don't know, in my understanding, if we want, the best way would be separating them, like category and the type. I don't know how much that is doable. It would be slicing, or it would be, I'm not sure, but yeah, that's my 2 cents.
So that's kind of another, I've heard a couple arguments for separation and clear separation that goes beyond the elements we have available. Elliot, you had your hand up next. Did we already get Rita?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so looking at the profiling here. So there's the contact element that is part of FHIR. Emergency is a slice, so it's a definition of some repetition of contact. It's not going to actually show up in the resource with the name emergency or anything like that. It's just, here is a repetition of contact that meets the following criteria. But when we go down and we look at the actual content of this so-called slice, there are no criteria on it. There's nothing to distinguish the emergency slice from any other slice, other than we've added comments to a bunch of the elements that say added for socialization purposes. So if you were to receive a resource, you couldn't tell what's in a contact slice versus, or a general, the all slices slice, or whether it was from the emergency slice. So on a technical side, there's a problem with how this profiling is being done. The other thing is, because relationship repeats, I see no problem with saying this particular individual, this particular contact is both a brother, that's one repetition of relationship, and they're also the next of kin, and they're also power of attorney. Now, you may have in your system multiple value sets, so that, you know, when you're looking for the power of attorney, you'll go through all the contacts and find any of them that have that concept in it. But I'd be hesitant to add an extension that conveys either the role or the relationship or the type or whatever. I think we're capable of expressing this in what we've got right now.
So how do we come to, so I've heard of, a few for separation. Elliot, you've spoken to kind of using the structures that we have in place with patterns, right? How do we come to a conclusion about what as a community we'd recommend?
So Thomas has his hand up, and there's a comment from Finney in the chat that you might want to see.
So Thomas, do you want to bring your hand up while I pop up the chat?
Oh, sorry. I just want to double check. Sorry, just want to put a comment here. My understanding here is that when I talk about this emergency, I think it's go back to data analytical world there. When we talk about the data, we talk about the right time, the right information for the right purpose. That's why I want to maybe rephrase Dean his words. Is the focus here is the emergency. This is the core business of this component here. And in that manner, we definitely would like to provide the right information so that the safety of the patient can be secured. But on the other side, we really don't want to provide over too much information that some other people's, their privacy could be infringed. In that manner, I would say yes. And also another side, this emergency component, I would say more subjective on behalf of a patient, that individual to make a decision. He might, or she, let's say he might just say, okay, I would like my girlfriend first, my, another boyfriend second, and never talk to my family. This is his or his own decision. So we need to respect that individual subject, their decision. In that manner, I would say, may focus on emergency, the relationship. Yes, it's important, but keep it as blur as possible to avoid any potential risk to leak any other relevant person's information. Thank you.
So Thomas, are you saying that the attribute itself that further conveys this is an emergency contact that is also my brother, to not have the attribute for brother? Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, just next to kin might be good enough. And if it really want to pursue actually what exact relationship, they can talk through the phone or by email, maybe message. That's all, depends on two or multiple endpoints to negotiate through after that.
It's an interesting point, and we've got 2 minutes. I'm gonna, like, anyone reaction to that, because we've only been evaluating this from what are our options from a profiling perspective? We haven't really talked about maybe we have to ask for a change at the framework level to create the separation or to remove this scenario from occurring. Is there any immediate reaction before? I think what we're gonna probably have to do
My
is.
one thought is that in a system that's implementing this, when you go looking for emergency contact, it should only be pulling up contacts with the relationship with the type of EC, which is emergency contact. So
Yes, and that was
on-
where. I
on
was
an
talking about
implementation
on the
level,
slice.
like when it's actually
Yeah.
implemented for use in a system, when you go look for an emergency contact, it's not going to be bringing up or it shouldn't be bringing up all those other pieces of information. It should only be bringing up that it's the emergency contact.
So that would echo then Thomas's statement, Joni?
Well, Thomas is saying not even to include things like brother and power of attorney and stuff, just to have emergency contact. At least that's what I thought I heard.
Yeah.
Well, yeah,
And
'cause
Dean-
he's saying for the
Dean has his hand
context.
up.
Okay, sorry.
But the Chi High value set has emergency contact relationship as a field separate from the emergency contact relationship type. Like they have two distinct elements. One
Yes,
where
it
the
does.
relation,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah,
And we can convey one of them, the emergency contact relationship type is fine because that's next of kin or emergency contact, or that's fine, that works. It's just where do we add the contact relationship to say that this emergency contact is a friend or this emergency contact is.
and we have two ways that we could go with that.
Yeah.
One is that we extend the value set, and the other is that we create an extension and tie it to a different value set.
So to be
Dean also
more
has-
specific,
yeah.
it's not extending the value set, it's conveying that you would supply these as distinct codable concepts. But
Yeah,
I saw one, I'm gonna let Dean, was there a quick comment, Dean? And then I'm gonna do the wrap up, because I think we'll probably have to chew on this a little bit more and then come to a conclusion on which we want to surface or how to surface both options and put it forward for like what should be prioritized in terms of the choice. Dean, did you have a comment
Yeah,
before we go to close?
Well, I'm kind of leaning with Elliot on this one. Like it's called relationship, and we're assuming it means family relationship because that's the examples, but it is just relationship. So if you want to filter, like you could have multiple relationships that supports it. You could have brother, father, attorney. Maybe your brother is your attorney. Who knows? And you can have emergency contact as a relationship type. If you only want those ones, you do a filter on that. Doesn't mean that you need another element to go through. You can just say, show me the ones that have EC in this relationship field. So you can put it all in that one field because you can have multiple relationships. Like I think what's there works. And as Elliot said, you're not going to see that it's an emergency. That's just in the structure. But when you go look at the data, you have to look at the relationship to get what you're looking for. So it's just as easy to filter that as it is going and finding other elements.
Right, I agree. I think relationship is 0 to many, so any one contact can be your emergency contact as well as your brother.
So I'm gonna pause it there because I think we probably still have a bit of a house divided. One, I hope you guys had fun today. If it was officially have fun at work today, because this is a really good conversation and this is exactly why we're trying to bring this very, very early to communities like the CA Baseline. Two, does it make sense on our next call to come to a decision on how do we want to frame this as feedback and also potentially request an extension? Because my hope was that we would know today whether or not we needed some additional time to do reviews, because we're looking at I think it's February 9th is our last Friday to review the content before submission. Does it make sense for us to talk about that at the next call, in addition to, one, coming to conclusion here, two, maybe finally getting to general practitioner, and then looking at practitioner? But what comes from that is that I want us to all think about, are there, like, if we're really divided on this, if one thinks we model it this way and another thinks we model it this way, like, we have to come as a community and say, even if we can't agree on the mechanism, how do we put forward, here are the benefits, and like, what are our considerations and our recommendation for how the folks within the framework and modelers like myself look at the choice that we put forward for CA Core. So it's
So
gonna take some
Dean-
compromise and good facilitation next time.
Dean just put a comment in the chat. Another reason for using multiple relationships is so that you don't have the same person in the contact list twice, that we need to have their information multiple times. I would say with an extension, you would put it on in the actual contact, so that if you went the extension route, you'd have an extension within contact, not like within the profile.
So Joni, what I'm gonna say is, maybe the way that we start talking this, if you can even just have like a slide or a Word document where you say, this is what it would look like. We can do the same from the other side. We've kind of done that in the profiles themselves. I think that's what we end up like, just seeing if it is possible for our community for us to say it's this way or the other. And we might use our votes as a way of deciding that. But we can't keep talking about contact relationships because that'll have to be a discussion for another day. And I'm gonna stop the recording